Hey, everybody, and welcome to episode 10 of the Habit Shift podcast. 10 double digits. Here we are, a little bit of a milestone. Unfortunately, it's just the three of us. Sandy couldn't make it today for reasons, which is a shame that she misses such a milestone of a podcast. However, we want to remain super consistent with these. We thought we would complete the hat trick. We have talked about protein, we've talked about carbohydrates, so we thought we would discuss nutritional fat a little bit, dive a little bit into the topic, dispel some myths, and kind of give people a little bit more clarity about fat, why it's good, and all of the things that maybe they should be considering in regards to it. So who wants to kick off and tell us a little bit, some basic facts about nutritional fat? Sarah, Jeff, we done one. We did protein and carbohydrates. So I guess Sarah, Sandy's not here.
Oh, great. So it's all down to me.
That's why she's not here.
I guess the first thing about fat is that it is actually essential and we can't survive without it. We have to have it. It's really responsible for a lot of things within our body. It helps our immunity, it protects our organs, it actually supports a lot of our intake of nutrients. So fat-soluble vitamins, we wouldn't be able to take those on board without fat. And I think, the good thing about talking about this is the fact that fat is like, it has such a lot of press, doesn't it? It's either, everything's high fat, the way to go, or it's the opposite and it's low fat and fat's the enemy. As you'll probably realize when we talk about these topics, there's always a middle ground, but the media and the world kind of get obsessed with extremes.
Yeah, definitely.
Anything to add there, Jeff or Raya?
No, I thought that was a great summary of kind of the practical things that fat is useful for. I mean, there's certainly all kinds of sciencey stuff that we could go deeper into, but for really the average person, and that's we need to know what it's for, what it does, and why it's important, and all those things are really good and important. I think that the whole middle ground thing that you said was really important for us to keep in mind, and that's probably a lot of what we'll be talking about throughout this is that taking it to one extreme where it's like eat all the fat, and then the other extreme, which is, oh, fat's horrible. I remember back in the 80s when I was I was heavy into rock climbing and starting to think more about my health, and so I was trying to eat as healthy as possible. Of course, there was no internet then, so you couldn't really Google anything, which is probably just as well. All I knew was at the time, low fat was quote healthy, and I was trying to stay lean, and so I misunderstood what fat was, and so I tried to eat as low a fat diet as I possibly could. I'd write down my little. I'd track all my fat grams and my calories, which was funny because I didn't really do anything with the information. I just tried to make it as low as possible. It was just kind of a silly thing, but kind of rambling off onto a whole different topic there. But I do remember I was in that extreme mindset of eat as little fat as possible, not knowing that was probably not the best idea.
That's the thing, isn't it? Like back then it was all low fat, but what people didn't realize is that it upped the sugar, didn't it, as well? Everything was low fat, but it's high sugar, but people didn't actually really talk about that part of it.
Yeah, I definitely did eat a lot of sugar.
Yeah, I think as well, people with nutritional fat, it is the most calorific of the four macronutrients. We have protein, which is 4 calories per gram, carbohydrate, which is 4 calories per gram. We have alcohol, which we haven't discussed, which is 7 calories per gram. And then we have fat, which is 9 calories per gram. So it is the most caloric dense macronutrient. So I guess when people cut out a lot of nutritional fat, and if they do lose weight, they realize that they are taking out a huge amount of calories from their diet. And fat gives things its flavor, its texture, Quite often it's shelf life and more processed foods as well. The combination we spoke last week of carbohydrates, fat, salt, sugar, all of these things give food, especially those hyperpalatable ones, that kind of hedonic kickback, that dopamine. They're the foods that we want to eat, we struggle to put down. So it's not necessarily fat bad, carbs bad, all of that sort of stuff. It's about the big picture and landscape of an individual's diet we need to consider.
That's the thing though, isn't it, as well, is that a bit like carbs, people lump it into one category, and not all fat is created equal. You've got saturated fat, which we know from research isn't great for us in huge amounts. We've got your unsaturated fat, which actually can be really healthy for us, and then we've got things like the trans fats, which we want to avoid at all costs. But people just say fat, and they lump it all together. So if they're on a low fat diet, then they'd be missing out on all the good things that the poly and monounsaturated fats are going to give us. And if they're on a high fat diet, like some of the kind of keto type things, they might be eating absolutely loads of animal saturated fats, which aren't so good for us. And I think coconut oil is probably quite a good one here, because a few years back, like, people were practically drowning themselves in coconut oil because it was supposedly super healthy, but actually I think it's about 80% saturated fat. So people were adding it to coffee, they were just literally having it with everything, and that's not going to be good for you. But because it was it had its little health halo, then people did it without really understanding.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That it kind of goes back to that extreme thing. I think that happens so much with our within our diets and also an important thing with the fat concept is what it brings to mind when we hear the word fat, because we hear fat from the diet, and we often equate that with fat on our body, which of course the diet industry has kind of ingrained in our minds that it's bad to have fat on your body. So we sort of hear, oh, fat on my body, oh, I'm eating fat, well, maybe I shouldn't eat as much fat, and that will help the fat leave my body too. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think over the years there's been so many kind of like kickbacks to either nutritional fat or carbohydrates, and they seem to jostle between the two. And I think, as we know, that the middle ground is probably the best ground to be in. It's just these often diet cults kind of, I don't know, form together and formulate this narrative where one is worse than the other. And as you said, like a diet that is skewed towards maybe too high in saturated fat, and particularly trans fats, because I think they get chunked together, trans fats and saturated fats. And trans fats are really the ones that we need to be super mindful of. But having dieted numerous times and lost a substantial amount of body fat, and I mentioned last week, like, the carbohydrate to fat ratio in a lot of successful like physique athletes tends to be higher on the carbohydrates and lower on the fat side. But we're still trying to reach that kind of fat threshold, because there is certain qualities in nutritional fat that it brings from a health perspective, such as like immune function, and all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, for me, I think looking at nutritional fat, I think it's an easy way to help regulate calories, but we don't want to completely cut it out of our diet.
No, totally. But I think, again, when we look at fats, because we are looking on the overall diet, a lot of people are getting far too much saturated fat because they're having it from processed foods. If they were having a more natural diet, then having it from your dairy and from animal process, sources, etc., isn't going to be too much of an issue. But what tends to happen, it's the amount of processed food, the chocolate, the biscuits, the crisps, the baked goods that are all really, really high in it, and that's comes with high calories, and it also comes with high fat, and that's not the fat that's doing us any good.
Yeah, and there's evidence to support that. Just simply maintaining like a healthy body weight and body fat percentage is the most helpful thing that we can do. So the composition of your diet is important, but its ability to regulate body weight is often the most important thing, because usually it's things start going wrong when people become unhealthy. So you know that they start increasing weight, and that's where the risk factors are more likely to occur in terms of heart disease, diabetes, all of this sort of stuff. And everybody's pushing blame on a single macronutrient like heart disease and fats that just kind of go together, diabetes and carbohydrates. But you know, I've helped people who are pre-diabetic or even type 2 diabetic, and they've had a higher carbohydrate diet, but they've been eating in a calorie deficit that they can sustain, and all of their blood sugars come back like, you know, better than they previously were, just through the fact that they are now healthier. They are eating a more whole food based diet. They eat more protein, they eat more carbohydrates, but from like fruits and vegetables and whole grains and all of that sort of stuff. And they are still having a little bit indulgent food here and there. They're not cutting it out. They're not like from one extreme to the other. And that's where usually the issue comes, is like, are people got this diet mentality again, particularly around nutritional fat? They're trying to avoid it for no realistic reason other than like they've heard it's bad or hearsay, all of this sort of stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's a dangerous ground to go, isn't it? Because I think we look at body size and we think because somebody's in a bigger body, they might necessarily have had a poorer diet and have eaten more fat and calories. But actually, the case for, especially for fatty liver disease, they reckon in America now 1 in 3 people suffer, and not everybody is overweight. You can still suffer with this condition, even though you may not appear so from the outside. And I think that's where we can judge too quickly, as we look at a body shape and we assume their health status from that, and actually we don't know what's going on inside. And actually, I think with fatty liver disease, it can be quite a long time before people actually will have any symptoms. So you can live with it for years and years, but the damage is going on in the inside. So, I guess it's always being open-minded about how people look and what their diets might actually be made from.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because it really does come down to where that fat is stored. Maybe we can talk a little bit about some of that, because I know we're talking about dietary fat, but there's dietary fat and then fat on the body. And so that's one of what you were talking about there, Sarah, kind of brought to mind something. I haven't read it in detail yet, but I guess Roy Taylor has a new study out, and where they basically, I don't like the conclusions that the headlines have, because they're basically saying your waist size should be. Hey, Jax, stop barking. I'm trying to make a point here. All right. Anyway, before we were rudely interrupted by my dog. Yeah, so he basically, the conclusion that's being pushed in the headlines is your waist size should be the same as it was when you were 21, and that's there's a lot of problems with that mentality. But in any case, the main point was that he was finding that each individual is very different, and the amount of fat that you have on your body is going to be very different as far as how much is healthy. So one person may be able to have a larger waist size and not have as much of that ectopic or that liver fat or the visceral fat that's around the organs that causes that problem that you're talking about. Whereas somebody else can have a smaller body and they may be significantly smaller and actually have a higher level of that visceral fat because of the way that their body stores fat. And so it's not really a one size fits all thing from individual to individual. It's very personal as far as the amount of fat that your body seems to store or carry and remain healthy. So kind of coming back to that point you're making, that's one reason why you can't just look at the size of a person's body and say, oh, they're a healthy size and they're an unhealthy size.
So that study you just mentioned, I think that must have been the one that kind of hit the press over here, where they were basically saying you should be able to fit into a size pair of jeans that you wore when you were 21. And I was like, you know, that doesn't take in so much into account, does it? You know, what about women that have had children? What about guys that train or exercise? You know, what about someone that is a skinny 21-year-old but then goes to the gym, bulks up a little bit? You never get your thighs into a pair, you know, something that you wore when you were a skinny 21-year-old. That's just really silly.
I really didn't like that conclusion. And so if you've read that article, I mean, it's obviously it's a clickbaity type of a headline, but I really didn't like the way the conclusion was. I mean, I understand they're trying to put it into simpler terms as far as the implications, but I really didn't like that, because that gives, for one, that just continues to perpetuate this mindset that everybody should be down to what they were when they were in college or high school, and that's just not realistic, and it's very unhealthy from a mental aspect. Even if physiologically, technically, maybe it's valid. Again, I don't know that it would be, but basically saying, hey, each person's a little different, and that if you've always been lean, relatively lean and relatively smaller, and then that typically means that your body naturally likes to be at that size. Just like if you were always on the upper end since you were born, your body probably can tolerate a higher amount of body fat and still remain healthy. And so it's kind of important. That's one of the things that we look at with kids, you know, the growth charts and stuff, when parents are concerned, hey, I think my kid is gaining too much weight, that kind of thing. We look at the growth chart and say, well, has it been consistent or not? And if it's consistently higher or lower, even below the average, then that may just be what's right for them. So I guess we're kind of getting off on a tangent there, but.
And unless you're under 30, I mean, who's still got their genes from when they're 21? I haven't.
I did a few years ago, but
I've still got me genetics in some sort of way, but genes, no, because they would have been boot cut and probably like a bit flary, you know, so they may not have kept up with the fashionable times.
My wife made me get rid of my acid wash jeans, so that was probably a good decision.
Yeah, but it's just funny because I guess these people are just saying, listen, this is very much the ideal, but as we well know, we don't live in an ideal world, and we don't want people to be put off trying to improve their health a little bit, because a lot of people who watch or listen or invested in this type of stuff are going to be trying to improve from where they're at. And as we talk about in the health episodes, just simply trying to improve your health in some sort of way is going to be beneficial. And discussing the nuances in nutrition, including nutritional fat, you know, it's going to help give people a bit more objectivity to what is truly healthy. And as we know, trying to get too healthy is unhealthy. So trying to be perfect, trying to cut out, you know, fat, carbohydrates, protein, over exercise, like not socialize, anything like that isn't really going to pay off very well in the long run. But yeah, I mean, nutritional fat, we'll get back to that. As Sarah said, and as you guys were saying, like, you can't judge a book by its cover, basically, and people might not, they might be lean, they might have very low percentage of body fat, but doesn't necessarily mean they're healthy. And Sarah touched on it, like the vitamins and minerals that are necessary to be absorbed alongside a fat within a diet, which is A, D, E, and K, if I'm right.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, if we're cutting out fat, we're not just losing out on some energy that comes alongside of that, but the ability to absorb certain micronutrients, which is going to have a knock-on effect from a health and immunity perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, what do you guys do as far as how do you help clients get at least an adequate amount of fat? Do you find that that's hard for some people, or do you find that most people tend to get enough fat in their diet? And if you know, how do you recommend that? Because protein, we obviously have that kind of what research has shown, and we have a grams per kilogram of body mass kind of recommendations that we can give, but we don't really have that necessarily with fat. So how do you guys go about that?
So like I prefer to habitually look at it like, if I'm honest, I would like to see it in 2 or 3 meals out of the day, but sometimes even myself, I'll just have a meal where I kind of bulk it in as a wanna, so I know fine well it's taken care of.
Mhm.
So that might just be something like whole eggs, maybe some oily fish, maybe and that'll be where I predominantly get like all of those quote unquote good fats from, because I think it's just typical that people neglect like mono and polyunsaturated fats. Like there's a lot of emphasis, any fats that they are ingesting seemingly are trace fats or a byproduct of the meat or dairy or like processed food that they're consuming. So I do like to have like a designated meal that is like, right, this is my good fat meal. If you'd like, I'm definitely getting it in there, whether it's some nuts, or as I said, whole eggs, oily fish in particular, which is largely underconsumed. But yeah, that's how I go about it. But it just depends on the person. But if I'm noticing glaringly, obviously, that they are missing nutritional fat, I just tend to like be like, right, can we get one meal that ticks that box?
Yeah, I don't find that people struggle with not having enough fat. I think it tends to be the sources that they're getting from that maybe is the bit needs changing around a little bit. But as Ian says, if you're having whole eggs, if you're having dairy, maybe some full fat dairy. Like for example, like I now started having my either overnight oats or porridge for breakfast, and I'll add some. I usually use 5% Greek yogurt, and then I'm adding some pumpkin seeds and bits like that. So you're getting and some chia seeds in it as well, and you're getting your healthy fats that way, and it doesn't add a huge amount of calories to it. Well, I think like you look at people's diets and they're getting it from the chocolate bars or what have you, and then you just need to swap it around a bit and make a few tweaks and go, well, okay, how can you get some better quality fats in and reduce some of the other fats? Again, it's always about what you add in rather than what you take out, or at least swap, rather than just right, I'm cutting it out, because that's what people tend to do, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's a good point with the adding in, because that I'm kind of the same way with both of you. I haven't really found many people who are deficient in overall fat. It's typically more, well, hey, where's the fat coming from? And yeah, adding in, taking an additive approach. When you start looking at eating more fiber or more vegetables or leaner cuts of meat or those kinds of things, you naturally end up getting your fat from different sources, cooking with some olive oil here and there and that kind of thing, or whatever it is that you do. When you start adding in those things, it just automatically shifts where those fats are coming from, and you tend to get healthier fats. And so, it's often, as it is with dieting, we're told, oh, you need to cut this out, you need to cut that out, and no more of this, no more of that. And then it's just, for me, I prefer that additive approach mentality. I think it just gives us a better mental state when we approach it in that way.
I think as well, if people are trying to optimize performance and health, we have things like testosterone and all of these other hormones that are going to help support like muscle growth. So if you take out nutritional fat, you're going to be lacking in some key nutrients that are supporting those goals. We've got, of course, like performance from endurance athletes as well, and we discussed the kind of the rate in which you synthesize ATP through the given substrate that's available. Oh God, I said a lot of words there. That's
fancy.
Well, oh God, what's going on? So like we know carbohydrates are more anaerobic, so without oxygen and nutritional fat, and the turning over of that is going to be more like aerobic based. So like by totally reducing one or the other macronutrient, you're potentially cutting yourself short from a certainly from a health perspective, but from a performance perspective. But again, it depends what you're doing from an exercise place anyway. Like largely the majority of what I do is anaerobic, and arguably using creatine phosphate system as well, you know, because of its explosive nature. But nutritional fat, when I'm not training, is predominantly what we're using as a kind of fuel source. But we spoke a bit about this last week, and kind of what your body's got available to use, your body will use for energy. So if you have a higher carb, low fat, predominantly you're going to use more carbohydrates versus vice versa, a higher fat, lower carb. And I guess we spoke a bit about why potentially people see high fat, low carb, and maybe we could talk a little bit about the kind of ketogenic or the high fat, low carb community.
I was just going to say that was going to be my next point, is like, it wouldn't be a podcast on fat, would it, if we didn't talk about the K word. I tried it once. I hated it. I'm not going to lie. I tried it for about 2 weeks because everybody talked about it. You know, everyone was raving about it. And I was like, okay, I kind of need to know what it's like in order to have any kind of opinion on it. And to me, it was messed up. I just sort of, you know, I found myself going into the supermarket, bypassing all this lovely fresh produce and going for cream and going for, you know, like butter and all these things of high fat, because I think if you really, really look into it, you know, you could do higher fat, healthier by using the oily fish and this, that, and the other. But a lot of the diets that were put out there weren't done that way. They were all about, you know, have the bacon. I don't like bacon, but have the cheese, you know, have all that stuff. And I was like, but I just want, you know, like a big bowl of fruit, or I want carrots with my dinner. And I just found that I just couldn't, my head didn't compute. I was like, I feel like I'm missing out on so many healthy, nutritious foods, and I didn't enjoy it at all. And you know what? I didn't lose any weight either. So, yeah.
Yeah, you didn't get benefits in either way from it.
I think as well, like the ketogenic community will have, like, their usual response is like, you didn't do it long enough, or you didn't do it right. You know, that they're very defensive about it. You know, I've had people come to me and they're like, you're going to hate us, Ian, and I'll be like, why? You know, and these aren't clients, these are just people I know, and they just know that I'm into health and fitness and all of that, and a nutritionist, and like, oh, I've started keto. And partly I want to turn around and say, I literally don't care. Like, it has no impact on me. But then 2 weeks later, they're like, oh, I couldn't stick with it. And it's like, well, yeah, like it regulates energy balance. Some people do genuinely feel better on it. But I think it's the appeal of eating bacon and eggs at every meal and all of that sort of stuff, and it's exciting, and I think a lot of people want to be excited about their diet. So when, like, there's us coming along talking about the middle ground, it's a bit like, oh, that isn't exciting, there's nothing special or, you know, shiny about that. And then you hear some person going, listen, you eat this diet, you'll burn fat like no tomorrow, and all of this, the insulin, and it's like, they're just kind of trying to like bamboozle people and give this illusion that they're more intelligent than them. And I myself tried a high fat, low carb. It wasn't keto, but like, yeah, I just didn't like it. I didn't make us feel good, and performance started to tank in the gym.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. I know 2 people that I'm going to say successfully, but actually I don't know if that's a bit of a contradiction, because they did a keto diet successfully for a couple of years, which is a long time to eat that way. But both of them were female. Both of them found that their hormones were out of whack towards the end. One of them was trying to compete, or not compete, but improve on like her big lifts, and she just couldn't do it. She just didn't have the energy, she didn't have the power, and she's had to add carbs back in. But on a social side of it, have you ever tried eating out with someone that eats keto? It is really hard. She came to my wedding, of which I had an afternoon tea, so couldn't have been much more high fat, I guess. You know, cakes, scones, sandwiches, all that sort of thing. She didn't eat one thing there. I mean, you know, just from a mental health perspective, going to somebody's wedding function, whatever it may be, bringing your own coffee and not touching a single morsel of food there, that's not normal. I'm sorry, but it's not normal. If you're listening to this, friend, I'm sorry, but it's not normal.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's one of the things that people don't factor into it is that social aspect and your food preferences. I mean, most people like carbs, and there's a lot of sources of carbs that are very nutritious: whole grains, legumes, potatoes, fruit, all of those things. And those are things that you have to really minimize, or almost completely exclude on keto, in order to remain in ketosis, because that state requires a very low carb intake. And so you also can't just go off keto for the weekend. That's one of the things that I hear people say is, oh, I'm keto during the week, and then on the weekend I eat carbs. And I'm like, you're completely
Missing the
you're
point.
making it really bad. You do one or the other, but don't play the middle ground, because you're just going to feel like garbage, because your body is never going to adapt in the way, and you're always just going to be providing it with too little carbohydrate.
And keto was never put about, was it, as a mainstream form of eating? It was a clinical way of eating for, you know, juveniles with epilepsy, wasn't it? I believe, because of the way the brain works and everything.
Mm-hmm.
That's a completely different thing from Joe Blogs on the street cutting out practically every joy in life, you know. So
yeah, it comes down to, I mean, some people are fine cutting out most of the carbs from their diet, but I find that the majority of people don't. And you also find that people, and this is a telltale sign that a diet is really not a very good diet, and that is that when people follow it for a period of time and then they just can't stick to it, and they go off and they keep talking about, yeah, I lost so much weight when I was on keto, I need to get back on the wagon, and almost like it's just this drudge, this thing that they just, I've got to do it, but I know I'm supposed to, and so I guess I'll go ahead and do it again because it, quote, worked before, and that kind of thing. And anytime I hear that mentality around eating, it sends up red flags, because I mean, we should enjoy our eating, and especially like you were saying, in those social situations, it's such a big part of literally every social situation, whether it's a business related one, personal related one, celebrations, holidays. I mean, they all of those things, you should be able to enjoy them, and you can't if you can't eat the food there.
This is one of the hard things with helping people with weight management. You very quickly realize that this isn't necessarily just a food issue. Mm-hmm. You know, it's very much a psychological and often an emotional issue. And like when they are, and it doesn't matter whether it's keto or tracking calories or, you know, being good, it's the language they use, it's the headspace that they've gotten themselves in through potential years of dieting, like decades. And, you know, they might come to us in regards to helping them, and, you know, we are having a more balanced approach, but that allows them to be more consistent, more flexible. And if there's genuine people out there who are, for example, keto, vegan, vegetarian, whatever, and they just are that, they don't identify as that, that's just an eating style that they have, and they just crack on with it. You know, like people tend to, when they are vegan or vegetarian or you know, keto or do CrossFit or bodybuilding or whatever, they sit in a camp and then they're just saying, oh no, I'm vegetarian or whatever, and they're just hoping that and they want people to acknowledge it, and it's almost like the be seen. And it's just like, these are my
cult, isn't it?
Yeah, and I just think, like, crack on. If that's what you want to do, if you genuinely wanted to do that and that was who you were, you don't have to sing from the hilltop. It's not who you are. Like, your diet isn't who you are. It's just something that you have that you should enjoy. And if you enjoy it, crack the hell on. So if people are at your wedding and they don't eat a particular way, if they were celiac and they couldn't eat gluten, you genuinely like, oh yeah. So I don't know if it's like whether you've got to respect somebody's dietary needs or choices, but it all stems from the psychology that they're bringing into that. I would say is important.
Yeah, no, that is a good point, because I mean, some people, there will be some people that genuinely love eating that way and don't miss carbs or what have you. And if they can function well, they've got good health and they enjoy it, then it's not any of our business what they do. They can do what the hell they like. But I don't think that they are the commonplace. Like you say, they have to shout about it. And if you've got to wave a banner, then that says a lot, really, doesn't it? And it's the same with all. It's not just keto, like you say, it's a lot of them. And that is your personal choice. You don't need to ram that down other people's throats. And I think that's where it tends to get argumentative, especially on social media, because like you say, people don't just quietly get on with it. It's like it's the new shiny thing, and because of that, that they're not going to keep it up long term. And good luck to you that do. If you're listening to this and you love keto and you enjoy it and you're healthy, then good on you. You're a better person than me, because I couldn't do it at all. I wouldn't want to do it. But I suppose one thing on that point though is that I think this will come up in another podcast we're about to record soon, actually, is the fibre aspect. And if you are eating a super high fat diet, that will come at the cost of fibre. And we all know how good fibre is for us. So that is a point, I guess, just to note.
Good health, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's an upcoming field that if anybody claims to be an expert on, even the experts claim that it's such a complicated field of research. But like, I guess it's so marketable now, isn't it? But like, good health is obviously important, and you don't just remove carbohydrates, you remove all of the things that are within carbohydrates, including fiber.
Yeah, so that is an important thing. If somebody is listening that's doing keto and they are kind of set on doing that, make sure you're getting those fibrous vegetables, which we'll be talking about in the fiber episode. But those don't have as much in the way of the carbs that interfere with keto. And so when you hear people that are eating kind of what I would say is a healthy keto, if as healthy as possible, they have a lot of those fibrous vegetables in there at least. So
yeah, I guess for me, like if we're looking to kind of wrap up, is there any kind of sort of main points you'd probably like to give people to go away with in terms of fats, choices, amounts, how to get it in? I know I touched on it a little bit, of focusing maybe on 1 or 2 meals to take care of that. But how about you, Jeff? I know with the intuitive eating, I'm interested in yours.
Yeah, I would say, with intuitive eating, you typically will base it more on how certain amounts make you feel. So if higher fat, if you tend to feel better, then as you guys say, crack on. If higher fat upsets your stomach and a particular food gives you heartburn, then that's the reason that you avoid it. You don't avoid it because it's quote unquote unhealthy. And so our bodies tend to prefer the foods that happen to be healthier. I mean, I think all of us can attest to the fact that when we eat more whole foods, less processed foods, that we often feel a little better. And so from that perspective, you base it more on feel. And when you do that, you're going to end up eating a good mix of things. And one of the things that I often address with people, and then especially with kids, because There's different things that you can do there, but the importance of fat is that it also is important in satiety. So in sustaining us from meal to meal and helping us to eat the amount of food that's appropriate for our particular body. And so, you can take a restrictive mindset, you can take a tracking approach and use those things to kind of keep you within a certain amount of food, or you can base it more on hunger and satiety. And when you do that, if you're eating fat I always encourage people to eat fat at every meal, some kind of fat source, because it does have that sustaining effect that sustains us in a different way than carbs does. And we know protein does also. And so I encourage people to eat protein, fat, and carbs at every meal. And from that satiety perspective, because it helps prevent grazing. We know too that when you eat dietary fat, it slows down gastric emptying, meaning it's going to keep that food in your stomach longer. So you're going to feel fuller a little bit longer, and all kinds of things like that. So approaching it from that perspective is kind of how I tend to use it when coaching people, like in an intuitive eating framework or with child nutrition. So
yeah, I would just go, boring as it sounds, middle ground. Don't be extreme. Mm-hmm. Don't cut it out completely. Don't go super, super high. Watch your sources. Try to aim for the, in inverted commas, good fats. You want, the healthy, the oily fish, the nuts, the seeds, olive oil. The Mediterranean diet always comes out on top. Not that there is actual definition of the Mediterranean diet, but on the whole, their diet is probably quite high in fat, but it is the good fat. It's not the junk food fat. It's not the processed fat. So I would just go down the middle. Do not try to be extreme.
Yeah, and working with people, we tend to be like experimentative with our practices. So it could be like, hey, have a breakfast. Maybe one day have high protein, high fat. Maybe the next day have high protein, high carb. Maybe the next day have like a splice of the three, and just kind of maybe see what you feel like at lunch. And if like it gets to lunchtime and, like me, I'm quite, I don't know whether it's half decent metabolic flexibility and utilizing both sources, but I can have a high fat, low carb, high protein meal, and it will satiate me as well as a high carb, low fat meal. I don't pick, I don't get, the only time that I'm hungry is if like I have truly like way under 8, like on a particular meal, but I can manage hunger quite well. I'm just like, yeah, I'm hungry. That's fine. Trust me, I've learned to manage hunger, given my history. So you just kind of like, I think you need to be a bit experimentative with it. And I think a podcast could be on its own regarding like fish oils or just supplements and key supplements, but eating oily fish a couple of times a week isn't going to hurt you. But considering supplementing with some sort of EPA, DHA, whether that's from fish oils or algae oils, if you are, if you've been watching Seaspiracy on Netflix, another great one. That's a joke, by the way. But
so you're saying don't watch that?
Well, yeah, don't watch that because like you'll just never eat fish again, apparently. But I mean, that's probably again another podcast, just mainstream media, and all of this sort of stuff. And I guess this is from where these conversations stem from regarding nutritional fat. But yeah, other than that, I think we can wrap it up there. So if you have enjoyed the podcast, make sure you leave a review, subscribe, share it around with your friends and family, means a lot. Take a screenshot and tag us in your stories. You can find us all on Instagram. Join the Facebook group, The Habit Shift, and find us on Instagram. And other than that, thank you for listening, and thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Sarah, and we'll speak to you next time.
Thank you. Bye.